Wrong place to break down, old man. That's what someone sneered as the veteran's bicycle wobbled, chain snapping right in front of the roughest biker bar in town. Leather jackets, tattooed arms, smirking faces everywhere. He didn't ask for help, didn't even look up, just bent down and started fixing it himself as the laughter grew louder. Until the loudest man in the group stepped forward and did something no one, not even his own crew, expected. Welcome to Grateful Stories, where tales of compassion and kindness are told. Let's uncover what really happened. I had just finished tightening the last bolt on a Harley when I saw him, an old man pedaling a battered Schwinn down Main Street, a couple of plastic grocery bags swaying from the handlebars. It was one of those dry, heavy afternoons in Redwood, Arizona, the kind where the heat pressed down on your skin like a second shirt. I wiped the sweat from my forehead with a greasy rag and leaned back against the open garage bay of the Ironhide Saloon, the unofficial home of the Iron Souls Motorcycle Club. The old man's skin, like worn leather, back stiff, baseball cap, faded almost white from the sun, looked like he was wrestling the desert wind itself. Nobody paid him much mind at first. Bikers lounged on the patio, boots up on tables, beers sweating in the heat. Engines idled, low in the lot, growling like restless animals. Then it happened. There was a sharp metallic ping, too loud, too sudden. The old man's chain snapped mid-pedal. His bike wobbled once, twice, and he barely managed to jump off before the whole thing collapsed sideways. He ended up right in front of the saloon, right in front of all of us. For a second, everything froze, the bikers, the music, the lazy hum of conversation. Then laughter. Low chuckles at first, then louder. Wrong place to break down. Old man, someone jeered from a nearby table. Another guy, arms like telephone poles covered in tattoos, raised his beer. Bet that bike's seen more battles than he has. A few of the guys pulled out their phones, snickering. One of them muttered, "Gonna post this. Redwood's finest entertainment." I shifted uncomfortably, but stayed put. At the Ironhide, there were unspoken rules. 1, you don't intervene unless you're invited. 2, you definitely don't make a scene unless you want to answer to Mason Carter, better known as Bull. The old man didn't say a word, didn't even glance up. He just knelt by his busted bike, pulled a beat-up multi-tool from his pocket, and started working the chain with shaky hands. It was then I noticed the cap he wore, faded green, with a barely visible insignia stitched on the front. USMC, United States Marine Corps. He wore it like it was stitched into his skin, like he'd been wearing it longer than I'd been alive. A wave of unease prickled up my spine. Something told me this wasn't just another old man trying to hold on to a scrap of pride. I wasn't the only one who noticed. The laughter started to die down and replaced by an almost edgier energy, as if mocking him wasn't as funny when he refused to be bothered. The old guy's hands trembled. Whether from age, the heat, or the weight of so many eyes, I couldn't tell. He fiddled with the chain, trying to reconnect it, but the tool slipped from his grasp and clattered onto the pavement. When he bent down to grab it, the bicycle shifted, and one of his grocery bags tipped over cans of beans, a loaf of bread, a few apples, all spilled across the asphalt, some rolling right to the steel-toed boots of the bikers watching. The laughter came back sharper this time. One guy kicked an apple gently across the lot like a soccer ball. Another started filming again, narrating like it was some reality TV show. And still the old man. Henry, I would later learn, didn't say a damn word, just stooped slow and steady and picked up his scattered groceries one by one. I felt my fists clench at my sides. "You should help him." A woman's voice murmured nearby. Maybe a bartender, maybe one of the club girls. Someone shushed her quick. "Why, best show we've had all week." That was the moment I hated the most. Not the laughter. Not the filming, the silence of everyone who knew better and did nothing. Henry straightened slowly, his back stiff but unbroken, both grocery bags now tucked awkwardly under one arm while he tried to fix the chain with the other. It was like watching a man rebuild a piece of himself in front of a crowd that only wanted him to fall. And then everything changed. A shadow moved at the entrance of the saloon. A ripple of unease passed through the crowd like a sudden gust of wind. Mason Bull Carter had arrived 6'4" if he was an inch. Bull had shoulders broad enough to make doorways look narrow. His leather vest bore the Iron Souls insignia, a skull inside a flaming wheel. Above it, stitched in heavy thread, one word: President. The man was a legend in Redwood, part myth, part muscle, all respect. He didn't have to shout. He didn't have to threaten. He just had to show up. And now he was walking toward Henry, heavy boots crunching gravel. No expression on his weathered face. I held my breath without realizing it. Henry must have sensed the shift too. He paused, one hand still gripping the broken chain, and slowly looked up for the first time. For a long, stretched-out second, nobody moved, not a breath, not a whisper. Bull looked at Henry, then he turned his gaze to the crowd, the ones laughing, the ones filming. The look he gave them was ice cold, no shouting, no threats, just disappointment. And somehow that was worse. One by one, the bikers fumbled to pocket their phones, their smirks faltering under the weight of Bull's large stare. Without a word, Bull crouched down beside Henry, lifted the battered Schwinn like it weighed nothing, examined the chain, and nodded once. "You coming?" His voice was low, rough from too many cigarettes and late nights, but it wasn't unkind. Henry hesitated. For the first time, a flicker of confusion crossed his face, then he nodded, gathered up his groceries, and followed Bull inside the Ironhide. But Bull wasn't done yet. He turned back toward the patio, toward all of us. His voice carried low and unmistakable. "Anyone here with a toolkit and a shred of respect, get your ass inside." No one dared defy him. One by one, the bikers rose, graybeards, young bucks, tough women in leather and denim, all of them filing inside like students summoned to detention. I stayed where I was for a beat longer, heart pounding. Then I grabbed my own toolbox and followed. Because somehow deep down we all knew this wasn't about a broken chain anymore. This was about fixing something else, something we didn't even realize we'd broken. The inside of the Ironhide felt different the moment we walked in. Normally it was loud music blasting from busted speakers, pool balls cracking across felt tables, drunken laughter shaking the walls. But now, silence. A silence so thick it clung to your skin. Bull led the way, wheeling Henry's battered Schwinn across the scuffed floor like it was a fallen comrade. The old man followed close behind his grocery bag, swinging lightly. With each careful step, I trailed in with the others. Half a dozen bikers, some younger, some old enough to know better. None of us spoke. No one needed to tell us this wasn't business as usual. Bull stopped at the center of the bar beside the biggest pool table, an old oak beast that had seen more fistfights than 8-ball runs. With one sweep of his massive arm, he cleared it. Balls clattered into pockets. Cue sticks fell against the rails. Then he lifted Henry's Schwinn up and set it gently on the green felt. "Let's see what we're working with," Bull said almost to himself. Tools started appearing like magic. Wrenches, chain breakers, cable clamps. From pockets, saddlebags, back rooms, everyone was pulling something out. For a moment, I just stood there, taking it all in. Henry looked so small in the middle of it all. This man who barely reached Bull's chest, whose hands trembled, just holding a wrench, stood straighter than anyone in that room. It wasn't pride. It wasn't arrogance. It was something older, something heavier. Bull knelt down first, examining the snapped chain with a frown. "It's not just the chain," he muttered. "Brake cables are shot, bearings are dry, tires are about ready to disintegrate." He looked up at Henry, who just gave a quiet, almost apologetic shrug. "You've been riding this like this?" Bull asked, not unkindly. Henry smiled, a small, weathered thing. "Gets me where I need to go." That was all he said. And somehow it said everything. Behind me, a few of the younger guys shifted uncomfortably. I recognized the look. Shame, the kind that sticks to you even when no one says a word. "You heard him," Bull said, rising to his full height. "Whatever it needs, we're fixing it." The guys nodded. No one even hesitated. It was strange watching them work. These were men who prided themselves on being rough, untouchable, the kind of men who wouldn't flinch at a bar fight, but would never admit to caring about anything. And here they were, wiping grease from their hands before touching Henry's bike, arguing softly over the best way to retension a cable, sending riders sprinting to the maintenance closet for fresh grease, clean cloths, anything they could find. I pulled out my own set of tools and moved to help. Henry didn't say much. He stood off to the side, grocery bags still clutched in his arms, watching with the quiet patience of a man who had learned long ago that sometimes survival meant letting others work their way toward redemption. A few of the women came over, offering him a cold drink, a chair. He refused at first, then finally accepted a stool near the jukebox when they insisted. I caught glimpses of the tattoos on Bull's arms as he worked, military insignias mixed in with the club patches, a story told in ink and scars. That was when it hit me. This wasn't just respect for an old man. It was recognition. One warrior seeing another, even across different battles, different years. As we stripped down the Schwinn, replacing the ruined chain, adjusting the warped brakes, I noticed something else. Henry never looked away. He watched every movement, every turn of a wrench, not judging, not criticizing, just present, like he knew what it meant to fix something that everyone else had given up on. Bull eventually straightened up, wiping his hands on a rag. "This'll take more than a patch job," he said, glancing around. "Anyone willing to make a parts run?" "I'll go," said Tyler Brooks, the youngest among us, barely 22. "Hair's still too clean to belong here. I know the shop across town. They'll still be open." Bull tossed him a wad of cash without counting it. "Get tires, too, and brake cables and bearings." Tyler nodded and sprinted out the door. The rest of us kept working. Around that time, more bikers started drifting inside, word having spread like wildfire. At first, a few hung back, skeptical, confused. But when they saw what was happening, the seriousness, the reverence, they either grabbed tools or got out of the way. The Ironhide Saloon had been built on 100 years of noise and chaos. But that day it became something else. A workshop, a church, a place where respect wasn't just expected. It was earned. Hours slipped by. The desert sun dipped lower, the air cooling slightly, but still thick with heat and oil and unspoken apology. I was hunched over the front tire when a shadow fell across the frame. I looked up to see Bull standing there, something folded carefully in his big hands. It wasn't a tool. It was a vest. A brand new leather vest. Not the full Iron Souls colors. No flames, no skulls. Just plain black leather with a single word embroidered across the back in gold thread. Respect. He held it for a moment, studying it like it weighed more than it should. Then he turned toward Henry. The old man was watching from his stool, eyes sharp beneath that faded Marine Corps cap. Bull crossed the floor slowly, every heavy boot step a drumbeat. When he reached Henry, he spoke simply. Quietly, no grand speeches. "We can't make you a member," he said. "That takes a different kind of ride. But we can honor yours." He draped the vest gently over Henry's narrow shoulders. It fit like it had been waiting for him all along. Henry's hands lifted to touch the leather, fingertips brushing the stitched word, respect. For a second, just a second, his hands trembled harder than before. But it wasn't from weakness. It was from something stronger. Something heavier than all the laughter, all the mockery, all the loneliness that had come before. It was a weight he didn't have to carry alone anymore. Bull extended his hand. "Thank you for your service, Marine." Henry took at his grip, surprisingly firm. "Still am," Henry said, voice low. "Just a little older now." Nobody clapped, nobody cheered. Some moments are too big for noise. We just stood there, a room full of outlaws and misfits, standing at attention for a man who had walked through hell long before any of us ever twisted a throttle. I swallowed hard against the lump rising in my throat. Some kinds of brotherhood didn't need patches. Some kinds of service didn't need medals, and some kinds of respect, once earned, were never forgotten. We had just finished fitting the new chain when Tyler Brooks burst back into the iron. I'd an arms loaded with bags from the bike shop across town. "Got everything you asked for." He panted, dropping the haul onto a table with a loud thud. New tires, brake cables, grease, even fresh grips for the handlebars. Bull gave a satisfied grunt, then tossed Tyler a water bottle. "Good run, kid." We got to work immediately. The old Schwinn was stripped down like a race car in a pit stop. Bearings were cleaned and repacked, cables rethreaded, tires swapped out for thick, puncture-resistant ones better suited for the cracked asphalt streets of Redwood. Henry sat quietly on his stool, watching every move. I noticed the way he nodded slightly at certain steps, like he was silently approving, or maybe just remembering a time when he could have done this all himself. As I tightened the last brake caliper, I caught a glimpse of something glinting around his neck. Not the vest Bull had given him, something underneath, dog tags. Old worn dog tags. Bull saw them too. He moved closer, crouching down, his leather vest creaking slightly with the motion. Without a word, Bull reached out slowly, respectfully, and lifted the chain from beneath Henry's shirt. The tags were dull with age, the stamped letters worn but still legible. Bull read aloud, his voice steady. "Henry Walker. Serial number 24937-168. Blood type O negative religion, none 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines, Vietnam, 68. He paused after that last line. The room went dead silent. No engines, no chatter. Not even the jukebox dared to hum. Bull let the tags fall gently back against Henry's chest and stood up facing the room. "You were a Marine," he said. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. Henry nodded once. "Still am," he said quietly. Just a little slower now. There was a weight to those words that punched harder than any fistfight ever could. From the far side of the room, someone stirred. Tyler Brooks. The kid stepped forward, hesitating, like he wasn't sure if he had the right to speak. My old man, Tyler said, voice cracking slightly. Samuel Brooks. He served in Vietnam, 3rd Battalion, 5th Marines. Henry's eyes sharpened. A memory flickered behind them, distant but not forgotten. Sam Brooks. Henry repeated slowly. Good radio operator. Took 2 in the legs at Quezon. Tyler nodded quickly, swallowing hard. He always said he survived because of a sergeant who carried him a mile and a half under fire back to the evac point. I felt the air tighten around us, like the whole building was holding its breath. Henry shifted slightly, adjusting the vest draped over his thin shoulders. Your father, he said simply, was one of the bravest kids I ever saw. Tyler's hands were trembling now, fists clenching at his sides. He made it back because of you, Tyler, said his voice thick with emotion. He he always said he owed his life to Sergeant Walker. Henry looked down at the scuffed floor, a long, slow breath escaping him. Wasn't anything special, he said gruffly. Just what we did for each other. Bull stepped forward again, clapping a heavy hand onto Henry's shoulder. You saved him, Bull said. You didn't have to. But you did. Henry shrugged. That's just what Marines do. The bikers around us shifted uncomfortably. Tough men covered in tattoos and battle scars of their own, suddenly looking like kids caught sneaking candy. Because here in front of them stood a man who had fought a real battle. Not over turf, not over pride, but over life itself. A man who hadn't asked for recognition, hadn't demanded respect, hadn't needed an audience. He just was, and that was enough to change everything. Bull turned to the gathered iron souls, his voice low but ringing with authority. We're not just fixing a bike today, he said. We're fixing a debt. No one argued, no one even blinked. We just got back to work, moving faster. Now, hands steadier, hearts heavier. Because it wasn't about the Schwinn anymore. It was about honor, about repayment, about making sure that, for once, the right man stood tall and the right crowd stood back in respect. As I tightened the new handlebars and checked the brake tension, I caught Henry watching me. Not judging, not pitying, just acknowledging. And somehow that felt better than any trophy, any patch, any badge I'd ever earned. Bull stepped away from the bike for a second, disappearing into the office behind the bar. When he returned, he wasn't alone. He carried something in his hands, a small framed photograph yellowed with age. He handed it to Henry without a word. I craned my neck to see. It was an old black and white shot of a group of young Marines huddled together, mud-smeared, tired, grinning like idiots, and right there in the center, unmistakable. Even through the years was Henry, standing tall, strong, alive. Henry traced the photo with a single trembling finger. I saw his lips move silently. Maybe a name, maybe a prayer. Then he looked up at Bull. Where'd you get this? He asked, voice hoarse. Bull shrugged. Family business. Tyler's dad gave it to me once, said to pass it along when the time was right. Henry shook his head slowly, a smile cracking through the years. Guess today's the right time. Yeah, Bull said. Yeah, it is. The rest of us just stood there feeling like we were witnessing something holy, something too big for word. In a world obsessed with fast glory and loud victories, here was a quiet reminder. Some heroes don't wear capes, they wear scars. And sometimes they wear worn-out boots, faded caps, and stubborn dignity that no amount of time or mockery can touch. The work picked up pace after that. Something had shifted, not just in the room, but inside all of us. Fixing the old Schwinn was no longer a favor. It was a mission, and we treated it like sacred ground. I was tightening the front brake calipers when I noticed how careful everyone had gotten. No more rough hands, no more rush jobs. Even guys who normally slap bikes together like patching up a fight were checking and double-checking their work. Bearing grease was spread meticulously. New brake cables were fed through with surgeon-like precision. Henry sat quietly on his stool, the newly gifted vest draped over his shoulders, worn hands resting lightly on his knees. But his eyes missed nothing. You could tell he recognized the ritual for what it was, an act of penance. An offering Tyler Brooks had disappeared again, and when he returned, he carried something that made my chest tighten. 2 brand new tires still wrapped in plastic. Top-grade puncture-resistant, thick enough to survive a war zone. I figured, Tyler said, slightly out of breath, if we're going to rebuild, it might as well make sure it doesn't leave him stranded again. Bull nodded once in approval, and Tyler got to work swapping out the old rubber like he was tuning up a Harley for a long ride home. Somewhere along the way, someone dug out a pressure washer from the back maintenance closet. We wheeled the Schwinn outside and under the baking Arizona sun. Decades of grime and rust peeled away under the blast of water and soap. The frame underneath wasn't perfect. It never would be. There were scars too deep, chips too old to fully cover, but somehow those marks felt right, like the bike had earned them. Kind of like Henry. Back inside, a couple of the guys produced touch-up paint and went to work with the care of artists, smoothing over the worst of the damage, letting the soul of the bike shine through. Tyler even pulled out a small decal, a Marine Corps emblem, and carefully applied it to the front fender, so everyone would know, so no one would ever mistake who this machine belonged to. When it was all said and done, the Schwinn looked well, it looked reborn. Not new, not showroom perfect, better, stronger. A machine that had fought, survived, and earned every inch of its existence. Bull stood back, arms folded, surveying the work like a general inspecting his troops. Henry walked over slowly, each step deliberate, his gaze sweeping over the bike. When he reached it, he didn't say a word. He just placed one hand gently on the handlebars and smiled. A real smile, the kind that creases your whole face, the kind that comes after a long battle you thought you'd lost only to realize someone had your six all along. Bull cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention back. He reached behind the bar and pulled out something wrapped in a brown paper bag. When he unwrapped it, a ripple of surprise ran through the crowd. It was a battered old bell, the kind you used to see on kids' bikes back in the 60s. Bull polished it briefly with the hem of his shirt, then handed it to Henry. "Had this hanging up back there for years," he said. "Belonged to my old man's bike. Thought it was junk, guess it was just waiting for the right rider." Henry accepted it with both hands, turning it over like it was something sacred. He didn't speak. Didn't have to. The way his fingers tightened around the bell said more than words ever could. Tyler stepped forward with a wrench and mounted the bell carefully onto the Schwinn's handlebars. When it clicked into place, Bull nodded once, satisfied. "Now she's ready." A murmur of agreement ran through the iron soles. But Bull wasn't done. He disappeared into his office again, returning this time with something carefully folded. A second vest? Another leather cut, identical to the one Henry already wore. But this one bore the full iron soles patch. Not just the word respect, the snarling wheel and skull emblem, the full colors. The room fell dead silent. Bull held it up, letting everyone see it. "This isn't something we give lightly," he said, voice low but strong. "And it's not official, not club protocol." He looked directly at Henry. "But some debts run deeper than patches." Henry shook his head gently. "I ain't no biker," he said quietly. Bull grinned. "Doesn't matter. You're family now. Whether you ride a Harley or a Schwinn." Carefully, almost reverently, Bull draped the second vest over Henry's shoulders, layering it over the first. There was no ceremony, no applause, just respect, pure and simple. Henry stood there back, a little straighter, eyes a little brighter, two vests heavy on his shoulders, and somehow it looked like he'd been wearing them his whole life. Bull extended his hand again, and this time every single orange soul in the room followed one by one. They came forward, shaking Henry's hand, clapping him on the back, nodding their heads in silent salute. Even the toughest among them, the ones who never cracked a smile, never admitted weakness, stood before the old Marine and gave him the one thing no amount of money could buy: their loyalty, their brotherhood, their respect. I hung back near the bar, watching it all unfold with a lump in my throat. I didn't even try to hide, because I knew we all knew we weren't just patching up an old bite. We were patching up ourselves. Learning, maybe for the first time, that real strength wasn't about how loud you roared, but how deeply you stood for someone when it mattered. Henry finally turned toward the door, his new bike gleaming under the neon lights. Bull spoke one last time, voice booming across the saloon. "Who's escorting the Marine home?" Every single hand shot up, every single one. And with that, the real ride was about to begin. The engines rumbled to life one by one, deep and low, like a gathering storm. I stood just outside the ironhide tool belt, forgotten around my waist, watching the iron soles mount their bikes with a precision that felt almost military. Henry stood among them, holding the handlebars of his newly reborn Schwinn. He looked different now, straighter somehow, taller even though the years still bowed his frame. The two vests hung proudly from his shoulders, the black one with respect stitched in bold gold, and the second the full iron soles cut layered over it. He wasn't just a man with a bicycle anymore. He was a symbol. Bull revvied his Harley once, a signal, The others answered in kind, a symphony of rumbling engines that just shook the very ground beneath our feet. Bull pulled up alongside Henry, reached down and with a respectful nod, gestured for him to lead the way. Henry hesitated only a second, then mounted his Schwinn with surprising grace. He kicked off gently, tires rolling smooth and silent groceries packed safely in the rear panniers, and the iron soles fell in behind him. 20 motorcycles strong, engines roaring, boots heavy on foot pegs. Henry pedaled slowly, steadily down Main Street, a lone figure at the head of an honor guard of chrome and thunder. I grabbed my jacket and sprinted outside, unable to just stand there. Other people were already gathering along the sidewalks. Shopkeepers leaned out their doors. Parents lifted their kids onto their shoulders. Even old Mr. Daniels from the hardware store stood at attention, his hand pressed firmly over his heart. Nobody said a word. Nobody needed to. They knew somehow instinctively that they were witnessing something rare, something real. Henry didn't wave, didn't acknowledge the growing crowd. He just kept pedaling, steady, determined. Bull and the others maintained a respectful distance behind him. Not crowding, not overtaking, just escorting him home like a procession for a king. The sun dipped low, casting long golden shadows across the asphalt. It looked cinematic, like something out of a dream, but it was real. Every rumble, every breath, every heartbeat. I hopped on my old pickup and trailed a few car lengths behind my hands, gripping the steering wheel tighter than they needed to. Not out of anger, out of something deeper. Pride, gratitude, maybe even hope. Henry's apartment complex sat near the edge of town. A modest one-story building, paint peeling a little, a battered American flag hanging limply by the door. When they reached it, Bull revved once more, and the procession split cleanly into two lines. Bikers parked their Harleys on either side of the walkway, engines idling low. Forming a living quarter, Henry dismounted slowly, legs stiff from the ride but his head high. He pushed the Schwinn carefully between the lines of bikers, and as he passed, every single rider, every man, every woman lifted a hand in the silent salute. Not a mockery, not a show, a salute. An offering of respect that no uniform could demand, only a life well lived could earn. Henry reached his door, turned back once, and nodded. No words, no speeches, just a simple, powerful acknowledgement. Bull kicked down his kickstand and approached Boots, crunching on gravel. "You need anything?" Bull said, his voice carrying over the growl of idling bikes. "Anything at all. You come to us. You're family now." Henry's hand tightened slightly on the handlebars. "And if that bike ever gives you trouble again," Bull added, grinning slightly, "you bring it straight to the Ironhide first-class service lifetime guarantee." A ripple of laughter moved through the bikers, not loud but warm. "Real," Henry smiled, that same small, private smile I'd seen earlier. The kind of smile you only see on men who have learned that true strength has nothing to do with how hard you hit and everything to do with how long you stand. The engines finally rumbled down one by one as the iron soles peeled away, respectful as ever. I stayed behind a few seconds longer, watching as Henry unlocked his front door, wheeled his Schwinn inside with careful hands, and disappeared into the quiet of his apartment. The sun slipped below the horizon, casting the town into soft twilight. I leaned against my truck for a moment, just breathing it in. There are moments you know you'll carry with you forever. Not because they're loud or flashy, but because they remind you of what's real, and that day we remembered. We remembered what it meant to honor sacrifice. We remembered that respect isn't given. It's earned, and once earned, it's never forgotten. The next morning, the desert sun rose over Redwood like it always did, burning away, the shadows bleaching the colors from the sky. But something was different. I rolled into town early the way I always did when there was work to be done, and at the Ironhide only. Today, I wasn't met by the usual clatter of tools or the smell of last night's spilled beer. Today, I saw Mason Bull Carter and a few of the older iron souls crouched out front, drills and hammers in hand. They were working on something shiny catching the early light. I pulled into the lot and killed the engine, stepping out quietly so I wouldn't interrupt. There, bolted to the brick wall beside the entrance to the Ironhide Saloon, was a brand new brass plaque, polished so bright you could see your reflection in it, and on it etched deep enough to last longer than any of us would. Respect is earned and remembered. No name, no rank, no dates, just that simple final. Bull stood back, arms crossed, surveying the work with a small, satisfied grunt. I walked up beside him, hands shoved deep into my pockets, and for a long moment, neither of us said anything. Because what could you say? Some truths didn't need dressing up. They just needed to be carved into stone, or in this case, into brass, and left there for the world to see. As the day wore on, word spread fast. By noon, half the town had made a quiet pilgrimage to the Ironhide. Some came to read the plaque. Some came just to stand there a moment, hands in their hats, heads bowed slightly. No fanfare, no selfies, just respect. That was how it started, and it didn't stop there. The real tradition began a few days later. I was elbow deep in a carburetor rebuild when I heard the rumble, not the usual roar of Harleys, but something softer, smaller. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped outside, just in time to see him, Henry Walker, pedaling down Main Street on his gleaming Schwinn groceries packed neat in the back, the Marine Corps decal shining proudly on the front fender. As he passed the Ironhide, something happened. Without anyone calling it out, without anyone planning it, every single biker out front stood up. Conversations stopped mid-sentence, engines cut dead silent, helmets came off, and there they stood in the Arizona sun, in their battered leather and denim hands, either to their sides or lifted slightly in silent salute until Henry had passed completely out of sight. He never looked over, never slowed down. He didn't have to. It wasn't about recognition. It was about remembrance. And we did it again the next time, and the next, and the next. It became sacred. Whenever Henry rode by, whether in blistering heat or cutting winter winds, the Iron Souls, the toughest sons of guns in 3 counties, would stand in absolute silence and respect. The same went for the townsfolk. Shopkeepers would step onto sidewalks. Farmers in dusty pickups would kill their engines. Teachers would pause their lessons and gather students at the windows. All for one man, one Marine. One example of a life lived with honor, no mocking laugh could ever tarnish. I asked Bull once late one night after the bar had cleared out why he thought it mattered so much. He leaned back in his chair, beer bottle dangling loosely from his hand, and said, "Because people forget too damn easy. Forget what it costs to walk free. Forget that freedom's built on the backs of men like Henry, quiet men who never asked for a damn thing." He tipped the bottle toward the plaque out front, catching the moonlight. "We don't let them forget around here." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. Because he was right. It wasn't just about Henry anymore. It was about who we became because of him, about what we chose to remember and what we refused to let die years from now. I knew kids would ask why the bikers stood so still whenever an old man on a bicycle rolled by, and someone, maybe me, maybe Bull, maybe Tyler Brooks, or one of the younger guys would tell them about Henry Walker. Tell them about the Marine who taught a bar full of outlaws the real meaning of respect. Tell them how some battles aren't fought with fists or engines, but with dignity, with silence, with standing your ground, when it would be easier to laugh and look away, and they'd understand, because the best lessons aren't shouted. They're lived, one pedal stroke at a time, one quiet salute at a time, one small, stubborn act of honor that refuses to be forgotten. Henry kept riding. Through summer storms and winter chills, he kept rolling down Main Street, groceries in his basket, Marine cap on his head, the leather vest snug against his back, and every time he passed, we stood. No words, no cheers, just respect earned and remembered always. In our darkest moments, kindness still finds a way, often in the quietest places. Not everyone who helps wants recognition. Some just need to know that today, someone isn't going hungry. And sometimes, that alone is enough to change a life. You may forget the story, but if no one retells it, history stays silent forever. Subscribe to Grateful Stories, where justice is honored, kindness is remembered, and no act of quiet heroism is ever lost.